And this month's Where Did the Road Go is sponsored by Super Inframan, Allison Cook, and Eric Hervin. Thank you all so very much for your incredible support.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And tonight I am joined once again by the Snake Brothers.
How's it going? Thanks for having us.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Snake 1 and Snake 2.
That's right.
Snake 2 here.
Snake 1.
Right. Sometimes I've heard the pseudonyms Russ.
That would be me.
And,
That's right.
What's the other one? Adam.
Cattle? Is that what you said?
Cattle. Oh, it's cattle now. Cal. No, that doesn't sound right. Joseph? No. I don't know. Just introduce yourselves.
Well, this is Kyle. Snake 2.
That's right. And this is Russ. Yeah. And we have the Brothers of the Serpent podcast, and we have had Seriah on our show, and we've been coming on his show quite often. Not as often as recently. We've been doing a lot of trips, but we are glad to be here and glad to be back on Where Did the Road Go for sure.
Yeah, I think I can blame your show for, I guess I now have this reputation for completely not believing in the missing 401, which is not the case. But
yeah, you are our resident scriptard on those shows. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I was trying to point to problems that I see with it, but
yeah.
Well, there are problems with it. I mean,
there are problems,
but that's with anything. I mean, all of this stuff. There's different ways of looking at it.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. Well, I don't agree with you guys. There's no problems. Hey, I'm all in.
But we're not going to talk about...
the 411 episodes we did with you were great. And yeah, I think that deep dives into these topics are required.
Yeah.
So,
but tonight
really
we're gonna start out talking about Cremo and Thompson's work, which you're in the midst of reading, and I've read a chunk of. Although I took the hard way and got like the 800-page version of Forbidden Archaeology, and you guys did the smart thing and got the summary.
Yes, it's called The Hidden History of the Human Race, and it's basically their abridged version of Forbidden Archaeology. So they describe it in the intro to the book as being the meat of the data without all the citations and various geological arguments or back and forths with various experts on why a certain strata is considered a certain age and things like that. Right. So they took all that stuff out and sort of put in all the material for a more popular audience, and it's very good.
Didn't Graham do that with one of his books too?
He may have done that with Underworld.
Was it Underworld? I thought it was Fingerprints of the Gods. I thought
it might have been. Yeah,
a shorter version.
It's possible. Yeah, I know that there was an abridged version of Underworld that I've seen, but I don't know if he did that on purpose or not.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean,
because Underworld was full of. I mean, Graham's work is on that kind of stuff. He does have all the citations and all the discussions and everything. So yeah,
he pretty much has to. I mean, he's attacked so vehemently that
Yeah, that's right.
That stuff just needs, and even when he puts it there, people still, accuse him of making stuff up.
Yeah, that's right. And so what's really fascinating, there's multiple facets of this particular work, Forbidden Archaeology and or the Hidden History of the Human Race. But the things that stand out to me, aside from the anomalous discoveries, and I even have a problem with that term, because to me, it's like, are the discoveries anomalous, or are they just outside of the scope of current theory?
Yeah.
I had this saying back in the day, which was like, there's no such thing as out of place artifacts, only out of date theories. Right.
That's nice. I like that.
Like an artifact is where it is. It's not out of place. It's
Right.
if it seems like you shouldn't, if you think you shouldn't have found it there because of your preconceptions, then your preconceptions are wrong. So anyway, yeah. So they're they're considered to be anomalous finds. A lot of them are old. Like, so we're looking at late 1800s, early 1900s things. A lot of times, right when it's right in the period before certain specific standard model finds became very accepted.
Yeah.
Such as Java Man, or other various like precursor hominids. So before those were found and became part of accepted theory of the evolution of late humans, or late stage hominids, people were looking for the story. So it's basically like kind of after the idea of evolution has been accepted into the scientific community, but before they really had the story nailed down to something that they were that everybody had agreed on.
Yeah.
So people were free to look for the how early is man in the evolutionary story, how far back does it go, and so a lot of these interesting finds are being found in those periods, and now they're forgotten or discarded because they don't fit the model that people came up with later after the finds of Java men and various other hominids in Africa.
Yeah, so I picked up the Forbidden Archaeology before I was doing Where Did the Road Go? And my mentality about these things is completely different now than it was then, because then, I could only afford so many books. So picking up an 800-page book was like, good, this one will last me a while. Whereas now, where I'm trying to read, 1 or 2 books a week, it's kind of like, oh, an 800-page book. I can't do that. That's way too much to read right now.
Yeah.
But so Thompson actually lived and went to Binghamton University, which is only about an hour and a half away from me. Mm. He also wrote a book called Maya, the world is virtual reality, or something to that effect, which I had read before I read Forbidden Archaeology, which I never finished, by the way. But I did read a chunk of it. But the Maya book was great. And when I started doing Where Did the Road Go and started thinking, like, what authors have I not heard, people like Patrick Harper and stuff like that, who I then contacted and were like, why haven't you been on other shows, I was like, oh, what about, what's his first name? Thompson.
Richard.
I'm like, what about Richard Thompson? I look him up and it's like, oh, he lives in Binghamton. I'm like, awesome. Maybe I can do this face to face. And he's dead. Okay, never mind.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Like he had passed away like a year earlier, and I'm like, really? So, and then I realized, he also co-authored Cremo's book. Interesting.
Yeah.
But I had Cremo on in the first handful of shows actually, and it was the first time that I was given questions to ask a guest. And I went through his publicity agent, and they were like, okay, here's the questions. And I'm like, the questions? But I have my own questions. And I'm like, what do I... And so I didn't make a list of questions. And when I got him on, I said, can we only talk about this stuff? And he's like, no. And I'm like, oh, I should have made a list. But that was...
I'm glad that he said no. That's good.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, he was open to that. We did talk about some other stuff, but I did run down the list of questions because that was from a new book I hadn't read yet. So I was kind of like, I'm curious about this stuff. But I like the fact that, he approached this from a religious stance at first. Because the religious doctrine, he's what?
It's some kind of Vedic thing, right?
Yeah.
From my understanding, yeah.
And they say that humans existed for like millions of years on this planet. And
yeah, the gist that I got was from the intros to the book, because they basically they lay it all out. Both of them is that they have that they do have these beliefs, and the beliefs basically say that humans have been part of the plan for the universe since the beginning.
Right.
So they have no problem. Number one, they don't have a problem with a very ancient universe, and number two, they think that however old the universe is, humans are just about as old because they've been part of the plan since the start.
Right.
Basically,
right.
Is a very huge generalization, I think.
And it's also a consciousness first model, I think.
Yeah.
So he went to, I guess he went to whatever guru he was, who was teaching him, and he said, well, this doesn't fit with the current science. Why is that? And he's like, I don't know. Maybe we're wrong. Maybe you need to look into the science and find out. And that's what forbidden archaeology came from.
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, he said that Thompson was already doing a lot of the research, and Thompson had gathered a whole bunch of materials, asked Cremo to join him on the whole thing, and saying, like, can you compile this material into a book? So I think that Thompson wasn't much. I don't know this for sure, but the basic idea I got from reading how they described the process was that Thompson was doing the research in the background, but Cremo is the one that made it into a book.
Okay.
But yeah, he makes him into a co-author. I'm not sure how much Thompson actually wrote. I think because the idea that I get from the intro of the book is that Thompson got Cremo to said, like, can you turn this into a book?
Right.
Yeah. And then they had research assistants too. They talk about having assistants because they're like, yeah, can you go track this down or see if you can? Because I mean, they talk a lot. They're like, we're looking at this paper, and in the paper there are references, right? The person makes there's like a single line in this paper that sort of is dismissive towards some object or some artifact or some ancient bone. They're like, oh yeah, the foxhole jaw, whatever. Mm-hmm. And then there will be a reference, and they're like, okay, let's track down this citation, and then they find that thing, and then they find more dismissive comments, but more citations, and then they eventually are looking at like they've tracked down the minutes from a meeting in Paris about, it's like of scientists talking about this thing, and they're like, wow, this is actually a really interesting case. So they're following these lines of evidence from more recent papers back to things that are 100 years ago or more, where scientists were actually debating about these objects. And I don't know, the whole research process was really interesting. And they get into epistemology and how do we know what we know.
Right.
They discuss that in the book. They're like, here's how we think about this. Like, how can we look at evidence where the only evidence we have left, because so much time has passed, are the discussions people had about it.
Right.
It's no longer possible to go to the site because it's underwater or it's been eroded away or whatever. There's multiple reasons why an archaeological site will no longer exist after 150 years. And then he's like, and then the object itself has vanished because it passed through multiple hands and you can't track it down anymore, or it used to be in some museum, but they tell you they've never had it, and all the records say that they did. Yeah. And so the trail just goes cold. So all we have are words of various anthropologists and geologists and even lay people or informed lay people like doctors, like sometimes it's like a doctor who is also a fossil collector finds something, Right. So you have all these words of all these people and they're arguing with each other about it. And that's all the evidence we have left of this thing. So you're like, okay, it's very well cited in the fact that all these people agreed that this artifact existed, but we can't study the artifact itself and we can't even go to the site where it was found anymore. So how do we treat these cases?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what's interesting is he says a lot of times modern scientists, or I mean, not just modern, but people back during when this was happening, would use all these facts to discard this evidence, saying, well, the thing no longer exists. It was probably a hoax in the first place. We can't study it, so that means we don't need to consider it. And he points, and they take pains to point out how often there are very accepted artifacts, bones, or whatever that are part of the standard model that have the same problem. They no longer exist. The site can't be gone back to. They were dug up by people who were not scientists, and yet they're fully accepted and are always put in the textbooks.
Yep. Yeah, as long as it fits the model that they accept, the evidence doesn't have to be good.
Yeah, and Kyle made a great point on our show. We were talking. He was like, "This is the problem with how did you say it? We were talking about extraordinary evidence. You go through that thought process."
I don't remember what you're talking about.
Yeah. So the whole thing, where they say, well, extraordinary evidence or extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, right? That's the first thing they'll say when you're like, okay, I found a gold chain and a piece of coal, and the standard model says this piece of coal is in strata that's 240 million years old, and yet here we have this object.
So that suggests that a claim that's not extraordinary doesn't require extraordinary evidence.
Yeah. So Kyle was saying, well, the opposite. We have a problem with this because who gets to decide what is extraordinary and what isn't?
Yeah. Yeah.
But Kyle was pointing out that the problem is that they also use it in reverse. In other words, if they say, well, this claim isn't extraordinary, so it doesn't require extraordinary evidence, and often that means it can be very, very sloppy evidence.
Yes.
Right. So it's a double-edged sword. That statement is terrible, I think, for the pursuit of science.
Yeah.
Like, evidence needs to be treated the same,
no matter what.
Yeah. Like if something fits within your theoretical preconceptions, it still needs to be treated just as rigorous or as not rigorous as stuff that doesn't, right?
Yeah.
So you don't get to say, well, we accept this because it fits, and therefore we don't need to ask a whole lot of questions about it. But this other thing that has just as good of a provenance as the thing that does fit, well, we're going to ask a lot more questions about this because it doesn't fit our theory. That's not the right way to do this.
No, not at all.
And that's a big thing that's happening in this book when we're going through it. You see this over and over and over, that the only reason that they discard it is really because of a priori preconceptions that are theoretical. Yeah,
and the other trend that you see is, depending on the nature of the find, say it's found in some layer of strata that is known to be a certain age. Well, if the find was maybe the details or the data around the actual find and how it was found are not that good, then they disregard the idea that it was in that strata.
Yes.
Now, if the details of the find are really well documented and there were multiple people that saw it and it was in situ in the layers, then they attack the geology. They say, well, those layers must not be that old.
Yeah.
They pick whatever they think is maybe the weakest evidence, and they just assume that evidence is incorrect, or that they can change the story there.
Yeah.
It happens over and over.
Yeah. Or they'll say, well, okay, so you found this skull, or say, you found a piece of a skull here, or perhaps it's like a stone implement, and they'll say, well, the fact that this stone implement is what we consider to be an advanced stone implement means that it can't possibly be as old as the implication of the strata that it's in. You know what I'm saying? It's they'll just say, well, that must mean that this strata has actually been rewashed and redeposited.
Yeah, that's what I mean. They go after the geological placement. They're just like, well, then it must have been stirred up without ever going to the site to see it. Like at the time, they just say, well, the strata wasn't that old then, or it was mixed up.
Yeah.
And how do you think cataclysm plays into all this?
Oh man, that's been a big part of the discussion we've had on our show, is because Kyle and I are obviously, and we're studying with Randall, with the Cosmographia podcast, we're studying with him about cataclysmic episodes and the idea of what Randall calls punctuated equilibrium. Mm-hmm. Which is, I'm sure you've heard the term, but it's basically like that, that the idea of uniformitarianism in geology is basically that's what's happening most of the time. And you have small cataclysms like local ones. But every once in a while, you have very large cataclysms that are global in scope, or at least multiple regions in scope. So an entire hemisphere, perhaps. Right. And those events are big enough and energetic enough to really stir things up, including large parts of the surface, to move enormous amounts of material from one part of the surface to another. Or to, if it's a volcanic event like the thing that caused the Deccan Traps, or say the Yellowstone supervolcano, where when that breaks open, it deposits enormous amounts of material in very short amount of times, geologically speaking. So when we're looking at some of these things, we're just like, well, maybe this, if you inject geologically speaking, frequent large cataclysms into the story here, perhaps some of this strata isn't as old as the standard model says, because the standard model in geology, at the very least, is basically uniformitarian all the way down. Right. They do now accept large cataclysmic events like the KT event, the thing that killed the dinosaurs.
Yep.
That argument is very recent if you think about it.
Well, they just basically settled it, like within the last 6 months or something.
That's right.
I remember, we all thought, oh yeah, the comet killed the dinosaurs or whatever it was, an asteroid. That was actually heavily debated up until just like within the last year.
Well,
yeah, that's right.
I
Yeah.
remember seeing a story that was like, okay, it's finally settled.
Yeah.
Didn't they say that the comet didn't completely kill the dinosaurs, but it definitely was sort of the beginning of the end?
Yeah, they describe it as being, the death blow that begins the dying, but it doesn't kill everything, obviously.
Yeah.
But what it does is it erases enough of the habitat to where the large species, and it's interesting because cataclysmic events, you can view it as like the I don't know, there's a correlation between the power or energy of the event and the extinction amounts of the species that are involved, or the species that are involved in the extinction. So that it's the biggest species that die first usually.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So a weaker cataclysmic event will kill the species that are the largest and have the fewest members, therefore, usually, right? The smaller the species in size, the more of them there usually are. So bugs bugs can survive. Ants don't have a problem.
Sure.
But it'll kill all the dinosaurs, or in like the most recent case, the Younger Dryas, it kills the mammoths and it kills what they call the megafauna.
Yeah.
It kills everything big because those are the ones that either can't hide or have nowhere to go,
Or they require lots of food.
and they require enormous amounts of sustenance from the ecosystem. And when the ecosystem is totally overturned, they have a lot harder time feeding themselves. So
and of course you have the evolution of dinosaurs into birds too.
yeah, or it's like they are birds, and I don't know. Yeah, there's something weird going on there, and they're still debating that. Like, were dinosaurs really more bird than lizard?
Yeah.
than reptile? I don't know. I'm a snake. They're probably both. I'm on the lizards. I'm on the side of the lizards.
Are you a feathered serpent?
Absolutely.
Which I guess that the idea of dinosaurs having feathers and the feathered serpent and all that. I mean, we have
that?
Yeah, we have the occasional cases of people having seen or reported dinosaurs not only in modern times but in ancient cultures too.
Yeah, I don't, and I've wondered, like, and this is probably a better question for you or many of your other guests, is this a paranormal encounter?
Right. Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I've listened to Where Did the Road Go for years, and one question I've always wanted to ask is like, where are the, like, I don't know, the Neanderthal ghosts? How come all the ghosts we have are pretty recent? Are there ghosts that are like really old, 12,000 years old?
I think you first have to define ghost.
Yeah.
So if you're talking,
when you
I think they grow up.
if you're talking about recording, like a stone tape theory type of thing, where you're seeing a replay of a past event, there are cases where people have seen like Roman soldiers marching, but they're actually, what is it, above or below the ground, wherever the ground level was at the time.
Yeah, you're right.
So it's like, but that just seems to be a replay. It's like almost like that information was somehow encoded into the environment strongly, and certain people can access it.
Yeah. So the question there is like, how long does the tape last?
Right.
Okay.
And probably until something disrupts it.
But seriously, if you think about it as a type of rebirth, right? Let's say, like, one of the ways I've imagined, death is almost like going to sleep, where like you're beginning a dream and you're kind of just going along with whatever's happening in the dream. Is this an indicator of kind of what it's like? You're just born into this world and you have no idea what is going on, and you're just doing whatever is taking place. And at some point you start to realize, like, what am I doing? You start to have you start to gain the ego and start to think about self.
Right.
And then you start to learn a little bit more about your environment and how to interact with it. And, maybe ghosts are more modern because they are, they're still figuring out the world. They're children in that world, still with a lot of serious memories. Like most of their memories, most of their mind is still in the physical world, so they're concerned with all of this physical stuff, and eventually as that's
what you meant by they grow up.
That's what I mean. Okay. Eventually as they learn to interact and become more mature in that world, they're like, oh, I have limbs, I can walk, And then it's like, oh yeah, why am I hanging around here anymore? Let's let's go check out the entire everything.
Yeah. But that's good. And Seriah, to your question on what is a ghost, I just meant like, when you see an apparition, when somebody sees any apparition without defining what that really is, like, do people see Neanderthal?
No, but I think, like, it's hard to say what a ghost is. The reason I asked the question is, I mean, are you talking about the spirit of a dead person? Are you talking about a recording in the ether or in the stone tape theory, however this stuff records itself? Or are you talking like a completely different spirit that is pretending to be something? I mean, there's so many different ways to look at this. Yeah,
I don't know. I'm just wondering, has anyone seen something where they're like, that's a ghost of a mammoth? Or, I mean, people see ghosts of animals, right? Does that happen?
Yes.
Yes. I guess what I'm asking is whatever the ghost might be, whatever its mechanism is, I don't know. But do people report things where you're like, wow, that's an ancient thing. Like that's a ghost of a brontosaurus or whatever.
No, but you have the time slip phenomena.
Okay. Yeah.
Where people suddenly are looking into what seems to be a prehistoric scene or whatever. And, and it does seem to match up with what we think at the time, which is interesting.
Yeah. And I guess you're right because you mentioned, Roman soldiers marching where they're like waist deep in the dirt. And I'd imagine that if there are dinosaur ghosts, most of them would be appearing maybe deep under the layers that we have.
Or they're marching around in the sky.
Yeah, they could be up in the sky. In some cases, they're down under the water.
Good point. Yeah. So I remember...
Man, that's really weird.
Man, T-Rex is running around in the ocean, man. That's a great mental image.
And what's the Loch Ness monster? I mean, there's no good. It's kind of like Bigfoot. There's no real suitable habitat for a large creature like that in Loch Ness.
Yeah.
But yet we've had reports of this thing going back through the ages. So is that a ghost? I mean, there are plenty of reports that seem that it's sort of morphic.
Well, isn't Loch Ness impact related?
Or it's glacier related, right? Isn't it carved? I can't remember, but yeah.
We need a watcher.
Yeah, where's our watcher?
Let me pull this.
All right, you be the watcher.
I'm gonna look.
Kyle's gonna find out where the Loch.
I was pretty sure that a lot of these, I seem to remember. Maybe it was Randall saying this. I can't put these words in his mouth, but I remember hearing something along the lines of a lot of these lakes where strange creatures are seen they're impact related lakes.
Really?
In almost every case.
That's right. There is a water serpent sort of imagery associated with a lot of lakes that may have.
And I think the idea was that this is a memory. And I'm not talking about the apparition of some being, but that the idea that there's a serpent in the water is actually a memory from our ancestors who may or may not have witnessed or heard about or witnessed the impact itself. So the serpent in the sky comes down and creates the lake, and that's where the legend of the serpent in the lake comes from.
Gotcha. And now that energy has a form.
There you go. Yeah.
Okay, so Loch Ness lies along the Great Glen Fault, which forms a line of weakness in the rocks, which have been excavated by glacial erosion.
So here's the thing about fault lines. Fault lines create earthquake lights and are very common for UFO sightings.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that you would also have monster sightings because, I mean, it makes sense if you're not assuming UFOs are extraterrestrial. If you're assuming that this stuff is some form of energy that is possibly generated by the Earth, even if something is taking that energy and manipulating it, it would make sense that you would get the monster sighting along a fault line.
Yeah, there we go. Mystery solved, folks.
And we're done.
And right. Show over. We can wrap this podcast up. But no, I'm also thinking, it's excavated by glacial erosion. I wonder how long ago. I don't want to dig too deep into this, but just going back to the ghost idea. If it's a ghost of an ancient creature, it doesn't have to be dinosaur. It could be, a couple 100,000 years old. There have been some very strange megafaunal creatures fairly recently on the planet. I mean, really, it's fascinating just to think about what North America was like before the end of the Younger Dryas.
Yeah.
I mean, you got things like the 4 species of elephant.
Yeah.
Camels, horses, many species of horses, the giant sloth, the American Pleistocene lion, which was like the size of a freaking donkey or a pony. Imagine that, a big cat that big. That would be pretty terrifying. And then the short-faced bear, cave bear, lots of very large.
It's like there's some giant beaver too. I mean,
yeah, there's giant beavers, freaking 600 pounds.
I mean, the small ones are a huge nuisance. They build these gigantic dams, and then you have one that's like, gigantic, building dams and cutting down probably huge trees.
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't know.
So back to your, I guess, taking it way back to your original question about how does cataclysm fit into the stuff that we're going through in Hidden History of the Human Race or Forbidden Archaeology. I think it's interesting because the authors, in addition to laying out their, I guess you would say, religious preconceptions at the beginning of the book, they're like, we're with this Vedic type of institute and we look at the world this way, but we're really just trying to look at the science here. We do not have a problem with humans being very ancient. They also say that we fully admit that many of these finds may imply that the stratigraphic dating that is commonly accepted in standard model geology may need to be completely rethought rather than saying these objects are incredibly ancient.
Right.
So, and then they just say, but what we're going to do is use the commonly accepted names for various geological eras and ages and epochs and the timescales that those are commonly said to have as a starting point. We're just going to go with that. So we'll say they'll tell you like this object was found here or this bone was found in this strata. We contacted the geological survey of that state or of that country, and they said that strata is dated to this time. And when you start looking at things like the really anomalous finds where they're talking about massive block walls discovered in coal mines in Iowa or whatever that are 2 miles below the surface in coal that's supposed to be 340 million years old.
Right.
You're just like, okay.
Didn't they rebury that or something?
Yeah, according to the story, the guy said it was an affidavit. So it was like, the guy swore to this, but basically, according to the story, is the coal mine was that they had to go down an elevator. They pumped air down to him, and they would go down there. And he said he set off charges in his particular. So that down at the bottom of the shaft, they had a long drift, which is the horizontal tunnel, and every worker had a separate room. And that they were working, and they would go in there and very carefully set charges and then they would all leave and then set the charges off, and they'd wait a couple of days for it to clear. Then they'd go back down in there and start clearing out the coal that they had blown off the walls and loading it up and stuff and shoring up the room. And he said he did that, and he went back down and he was starting to timber up the room, but he found these big he found these 1 foot on a side cubes that he said had mirror sides, but he broke one open with his pick, and he said it was concrete on the inside. It was like gravel and aggregate, but it had been polished. Right. And there were several of them lying around. And then he said that the room started to collapse on him, and he barely got out with his life. And then when he went back in, he saw that the coal face had basically fallen off a whole wall of these things.
Yeah.
And that 130 feet farther down the horizontal, the drift, in a different room, another miner had also encountered either the same wall or a different one made of the same type of cubes. And that, they pulled them all out of the mine and shut it down and told them, basically don't talk about this. And they sent them to different mines in different states.
Huh.
That was that story. And I'm just like, man, this mine is still there.
Right.
Somebody needs to go down there and find this thing.
Well, there's also the controversy about the wall in Texas there.
Oh, yeah, Rockwall.
Rockwall, yeah, which, I mean, I know they did, who was it that had the TV show where they investigated it?
Yeah, dang it.
America on Earth?
Yes.
Yeah, it was America on Earth. I can't remember the guy's name.
And he
I know it.
I know it too, and I can't remember it.
Yeah.
But he supposedly, did testing on it and said it was natural and all this other stuff, and other people are like, he didn't test the actual wall. Like, he tested a part of the what may have been the wall, but not like the main segment that everyone agreed was definitely the wall or something like that.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And I mean, it's sort of under
Scott Walter.
Scott Walter.
That's it.
There, yeah, right. Yeah, and I don't want to argue too much against Scott. I mean,
I'll argue this. Look, this is the problem I got with it. He uncovers a portion of the wall, right? He uses a local and the guy has a big excavation company, and he's like, yeah, let's dig it up. I know where an outcrop is.
Right.
So they dig up a giant face of the wall, and then he takes drill cores out of multiple different blocks, and then he has them tested for the magnetic alignments of the, basically when the rock was formed, you're going to have all these, magnetic particles in the rock all facing north or whatever. Basically, they're going to be aligned to the magnetic field of the Earth during the formation of the rock.
Yes.
And so the argument was that every different core that he took, the alignment was the same.
Yeah.
Meaning that this was a natural formation, right?
Mm-hmm.
in other words, that people won't build a wall.
If they're quarrying rock, the rocks are going to be flipped, and so the alignments will be all oriented in different directions, right?
Yeah.
That's the argument. So there's two things. First of all, there's a lot of stuff about ancient masons that we don't understand how they did certain things, and they built walls in ways that we don't do today. So there is the possibility that actually was a concern, and I think there is some evidence that very well known and accepted stone wall constructions have all the alignments in the same direction.
Yeah, that they're aligned to the earth.
But the other argument is that this is maybe partially a natural formation that was utilized and altered by people, by intelligent beings. Right. We also see that where they take a natural thing and then they alter it. And there are strange things built into that wall that look like lintel stones and windows and archways. That's what you need to check.
Right. And in some cases, I mean, there are pictures, of not that section that they dug up specifically, but older pictures that are in newspapers. We got sent a bunch of this material by somebody who lives there that we had on our show, where the blocks have bevels. They're beveled all the way around on the faces, and that just doesn't happen on a natural object, at least. I mean, and now, so it may be a natural object where they just went in and it was already sort of fractured and all that, and to look like a wall, and then they beveled all the fractures. But that doesn't mean, but that still means that somebody worked on it.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. So I guess I don't think it's conclusive. It's suggestive for sure. The evidence that he tested, that Scott, got from those cores, but it's not conclusive.
Right. And the other thing is the, and this is a bit more of, so then of course the question becomes, well, what is it if it's a natural formation? And they try to say, what is it called?
A sand dike.
A sand dike. Now,
sandstone dike.
Yeah, sandstone dike, which is basically the geological concept here is you have some sedimentary layer that cracks, it splits open on the surface. And then eventually that crack gets filled in with different material, and that material lithifies, turns into stone, right? And then later people or erosion or whatever comes along and starts working at that, and the material that filled in the crack is a little bit harder and of a different composition, and so the stuff around it erodes faster, and so you end up with this thing that might look like a wall. Well, we looked up a bunch of sandstone dikes, and they don't look anything like this.
Okay.
They have very naturally looking, they look natural, and they're not straight, and they I don't know. It's in other words, if it is that kind of formation, it's unique and worthy of study just by that fact. But because it has this sort of stigma around it that it might be a natural artifact and very, very old, and in the Americas, that's 3 strikes against it.
Right.
They don't want to look at it.
If I'm remembering right, there are stone rings that all the stones are aligned magnetically the same way.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. I mean, Kyle's right. I can't think offhand of any specific sites, but I do remember reading about magnetic alignments that are, where they're all aligned the same way.
Yeah, which means they had some intuition or some way of testing that when they aligned these stone circles.
That's right.
Because I'm sure there's, I want to say Avebury is one of the ones they've tested and found that all the stones have the same like alignment on them.
Yeah.
So either that,
I seem
or
to remember something about it with Karnak, possibly. I can't remember.
Either they had a way of determining the alignment, or they were able to change the magnetic field of the stones.
Yeah, now that's a really interesting idea. Some stone artifacts seem to have magnetic hotspots built into them in specific places. I'm thinking maybe it's the Olmec heads that have this. Don't quote me on that, but I think it is Olmec related stuff where basically they've got these gigantic statues. They're not statues, they're humongous sculptures of faces. Yeah. And they have like magnetic hotspots in specific areas. And it's like, were they aware that those hotspots existed?
Right. Or did they somehow create them?
Or did the process that they used to make those sculptures generate those hotspots?
Also possible, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember seeing a Discovery Channel, sort of one of those debunking shows talking about the Olmec heads. And, those things are, in excess of multiple tons, if I remember right.
Yeah, they're huge, and they're made out of very hard, dense stone.
So, in the show, what they did is they made one that was like a quarter of a ton. And they didn't actually make a head. They just took a block that was a quarter of a ton and showed that you could move this quarter-ton block from where they think they were quarried to where, they found them without any kind of advanced technology.
Oh, is that like Easter Island? Is that what you're talking about?
No, it was the Olmec heads.
Oh, okay. Because I know they did that same thing with the Easter Island heads too. It wobbled them back and forth to get them to move.
Well, in this case, though, they just with manpower moved these like 500-pound blocks or whatever. And then, they had to put it on a raft, and they had to, the raft had to have enough displacement where it barely fit on the river they put it on. And, they got it there, and they're like, see, now we've proved how they moved them. I'm like, that's nowhere near the size of the ones they were moving.
Yeah.
Now why don't you take one of the, a 5-ton block and see if you can do it that way?
Yeah, or 70 tons or whatever they actually weigh, right? Because, I can't remember if we've ever said this on your show before, but Kyle and I have had many conversations. We both are, we're builders, we do construction, and we operate heavy machinery, and we're familiar in some cases with moving heavy loads, not like the big guys do. Some people move really enormous loads. Our dad moved a lot of, worked with cranes and moved heavy loads, and it's a big deal, and it doesn't scale. It's not a one-to-one scale, right? It's not a linear scale, I should say. Like the difficulty of moving a 1-ton block versus the difficulty of moving a 10-ton block, the 10-ton block is not 10 times harder. It's it's hundreds of times harder, right? So in other words, it's not a linear scale. The difficulty doesn't scale in the same way. Like, so if you're going from moving a 10-ton block to a 100-ton block, that's not, the 100-ton block is not only 10 times harder than the 10-ton block.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's much, much more than that. And when the weights get enough, you begin to have material failure. Not only the material failure of the object you're trying to move, right? Like, in other words, if you've got a block with square edges, you've cut it nice and sharp, and it weighs 100 tons, and then you want to pick it up, you have to be very careful not to break those sharp corners off that block.
Right.
Because the edge, you're putting a large fraction of the weight of that block onto that corner wherever your strap is going around, however you're picking it up. You've got to be very careful. And then you have material failures and the things you're trying to use to move it. So rolling a 1-ton block on like logs will work, but if you put a 100-ton block on those logs, the logs just fracture into pieces. They stop being able to hold the weight. Or I don't know how much you want me to nerd out on this, but then you also have the problem of what is the thing that you're using to pick the block up with sitting on, and can that hold the weight, right? In other words, you got to have a nice road base. If you're going to move it, if you've seen everybody's seen pictures of the shuttle, back when we had a space shuttle, when they used to move it, that gigantic machine they put it on.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, they put on that enormous machine to roll it from, where they work on it to where they're going to launch it. They built that road for that machine to roll on very specifically. It has to hold that weight.
Yeah.
So in a lot of places where these big blocks are, even if you can come up with all kinds of interesting ways for them to move blocks around, you got to have a road. And the roads don't exist in a lot of cases. There are no roads from where they quarried the blocks to where the blocks are.
Where did the road go then?
Where did the road go is the question. That's right.
I know there were also people who said, "Oh, we figured out how they built the pyramids. We built this little one, and
Yep.
we just scale those methods up, and there you go." And I'm like, no.
Yeah.
Go build us something the size of the Great Pyramid with those blocks and that precision, and then I'll be convinced you figured it out.
Yeah. And then they don't tell you that they ended up using heavy machinery and steel tools and
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Or they do, but you have to dig a little deeper to find that out.
Right. Yeah.
Because I mean, the thing that you hear is that even with our ability to build things today, we couldn't build the Great Pyramid.
Yep. That's
Yeah.
right. All right, I did some digging and I did not find anything
Did
about
some watering.
Yeah, I was trying to find if like stone. It's kind of hard to search for this, but ancient stone constructions with
Magnetic alignments.
magnetic alignments in the stone.
Yeah.
Didn't find it. So I don't know where I heard that. But the only thing I found was one reference to it on the Human Origin Project, where they state, for example, certain stone circles may be aligned with the magnetic qualities of the stones. In some cases, the stones are laid out. They each point magnetically to the next stone in the circle. But of course, they don't tell you where.
I think that's
this
Avebury.
is. Avebury, okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know that for sure, but it doesn't seem implausible to me that may have been a technique, right? Like just because of so many of the other
And
insanely meticulous techniques that they use to lay some of these stone sites.
And it may be possible to figure out magnetic stuff without any special equipment. Have we ever told you the magnet experiment that Kyle did on me?
I don't think
Seriah?
so. I don't think so.
Okay.
I bought I don't know how to pronounce it, but the neodymium magnet.
Okay.
Right?
They're really strong rare earth magnets.
I bought it's about a half-inch bar magnet, but I had 3 of them, so it made about a 3-inch magnetic bar. And then I have an actual half-inch steel bar. When you close your eyes, their sizes and the weights are basically the same when you're holding one in one hand and one in the other. But I was holding them, and I'm like, this magnet feels different, right?
Huh.
Why does this magnet seem to feel different? Not in a strange way. And I'm just like, it's probably just because I know it's a magnet, and I'm just making this up. So I used Russ to run this experiment, and he shows up down here. We're about to start the podcast or something, and I'm like, all right, hold your hands apart.
Close your eyes.
Close your eyes. Hold your hands apart. And I'm gonna put something in your hands. And
That takes trust, buddy.
Yeah, he closes his eyes. He holds his hands apart, and he opens them up. And I put these 2 steel, the magnetic and the steel bar in one hand, and the magnetic one in the other. And he's like sitting there with his eyes closed. And I'm like, so what do you think? And he's just like moving them around, and then he's like, this one feels weird, and it's the magnet. Yeah, I was like, yes, okay.
So without any practice, right? It seems like, so you can imagine maybe ancient people could cultivate, if this is really a thing, could people possibly cultivate the ability to detect magnetic fields, without any tools at all?
Yeah. Yeah.
And there are, examples in nature, like certain birds. I can't remember what the cells are called.
Oh man,
Anne told us what they were.
Yeah, I don't
She
remember.
wrote us an email about this because we were talking. Anyway, they have some kind of chemical in their brain that
detects magnetic fields, and yes.
Yeah, so they can follow magnetic field lines, right?
Louis Proud wrote a book called Strange Electromagnetic Dimensions that talks about stuff like that.
Yeah, I imagine that most migrating creatures must have something like this.
Yeah, yeah.
And humans, we don't really migrate, but I mean, we've all met people who seem to have a compass in their head. They always know which direction they're facing.
Right.
You can ask them at any, and they're like, "Yeah, north is over there." I mean, they just know. and other people don't. Like I don't have this. Like my compass in my head is not there, so I get lost all the time. But some people do have it, so I think it's stronger in other people. And yeah, there's something going on there. So possibly it's possible to cultivate this kind of thing, and detecting the Earth's magnetic field or detecting magnetic fields of objects.
And then you have dowsing, which seems to interact with that, whether it's because the person is unconsciously picking up on the information, or there's something about those rods, using certain types of rods or trees that react to this stuff.
Yeah.
I suspect it's the former.
Right. Yeah.
Cryptochrome is the name of the chemical.
Oh, yeah.
It's a great name.
Yeah. It's a good band name.
Yeah, it's a good band name.
But I mean, and I was surprised when they were doing something in my yard. I forget what it was. I think it was when my back basement kept flooding, and they were trying to figure out where it drained to. And this guy just picks up a stick and starts dowsing. And I'm like,
oh, yeah.
Huh. I didn't expect that.
You want to come on the podcast?
He wasn't successful, so,
Okay, all right.
But
okay, well, we have another story. Did we ever tell you Russ's dowsing story?
I don't know.
He's always been fascinated by the dowsing thing, and we at work we were having to dig up. We're going to be running this big electrical line, and we needed to know where the water lines or the electric lines or whatever that were going across this area before we dug a trench, right? And Russ is like, well, we hired these guys. They were coming out with an instrument, and they were going to run it all through the yard and find and mark all the paths of these pipes and electric lines. And Russ was like, hey, man, this is my chance, right?
Yeah, I'm like, this is my chance to test this. Because they're going to come out with actual equipment to find them, so I can go out here and douse it, and then I'll mark what I find dowsing, and I'll see if I'm right.
So he makes himself some dowsing rods, and he's out there, and I'm in the shop like working or whatever. He finally comes back in, and he's like, I don't know, man, I can't do it.
Yeah.
I'm like, what's the deal? He's like, I didn't find anything. And I'm like, really? He's like, nothing. Yeah, it's just, I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing. So then the guys come out with the instrument, and they start running around in the yard, and there's nothing. And they end up finding out that the lines are in a completely different area that we did not expect. So I was like, dude, you succeeded.
Yeah.
I mean, there was no false positive. It was like, you
Yeah.
didn't find anything because there was nothing there.
That reminds me of the one time I felt like I actually projected out of body. Like I was conscious, and I was like, can I do this? And I found myself up at that cliff where I've had weird things happen. And I said, but how do I know I'm here? How do I know I'm just not imagining it? And I'm like, wait, my friend wrote something on the tree the last time we were here, and I don't know what it was. I'm going to go look at the tree. And so I float over to the tree, and there's nothing on the tree. And I'm like, okay, this is just my imagination. And so like later I'm talking to him. I'm like, by the way, what did you write on the tree the other day? He's like, what? Oh, I couldn't think of anything, so I didn't write anything. And I'm like, damn it, now I don't know if I was there or not.
Yeah.
Well, we just consider that proof.
That's
that
right.
You were actually
That
there.
is actual evidence that you were there.
Or at least picked up on the information.
Yeah.
'Cause
Yeah.
I think
it's
so
just
much of
interesting,
this,
right? You thought you expected there to be something on the tree, and there
Right.
wasn't. So could it have been? I mean, is that your imagination?
Right. It's hard to say. Well, I'm saying information, like it may not have actually been out of body, but was able to pick up the information from that area. Like, I think so much of this stuff is information based,
Yeah.
So like when you're dowsing, maybe it is that you're unconsciously picking up something, but maybe that stuff is literally just information.
Yeah. Yep. That's right.
I
was going to say, do we take this back to Cremo? Or
Yeah. So one of the things I remember in the book was a modern human being found under like this piece of very solid rock that they had absolutely no doubts had to be there like however many millions of years. Is that part in the one you read?
Yeah, well, okay. So these kinds of discoveries are always debated, and somebody doesn't believe them, right? But like the finds in, for example, the Tabletop Mountain gold mines, were very interesting, and in a lot of cases they would find artifacts plus the bones, and in one case it was like the bones plus the artifacts plus like lying on the ground, what used to be like what they call a paleo surface, right? So it's a very ancient ground surface that is now basically underneath a mountain, but the mountain is really a butte. It's a large sediment deposit that's later been eroded away into a butte, like a mesa.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So they find there's like a petrified tree and bones and all these spear points on what used to be the ground surface underneath this mesa, where they were mining for gold.
But the thing is that there's no one's disputing the idea that this was once the ground surface.
Right.
So they're actually digging through river gravels and finding gold nuggets that used to be in the bottom of this river.
Yeah.
But now the ancient riverbed has a mountain on top of it, basically.
Yeah.
This butte. So it's, as an artifact hunter, where are you going to look for artifacts in or around water?
Right.
Stone
or where
artifacts.
there was water. Yeah.
Yeah, where there was water. So dry creek beds, live creek beds, whatever you can. That's where you go. That's where they were, and so it's not. That's totally what you would expect to find if there were humans around at that time. That's what's disputed. Is it like, okay, that this basically this butte or this mountain that's on top of this ancient river is indicative that the river itself is extremely old, but maybe not because of cataclysms, right?
To get the mesa, you have to deposit enormous amounts of sediment over the entire landscape.
And then you have to erode it away.
And then you have to put a bunch of water all around that area to erode it away and to leave a mesa in that spot.
Right.
And then the gold rush people were digging into the side. They went down into a gully or a gorge at the side of the mesa and were digging in to the side of the mesa and going down and basically following what was the ancient surface before that mesa was there, because there's an old riverbed there and a bunch of river gravel. It's all cemented together at this point. It's like hard as rock. It's basically silts and river cobbles that have been turned into a kind of cement. So it isn't like digging through sand. It's very it's very cemented. And then they're finding gold nuggets in that because this ancient river had a gold source somewhere. But they also started finding artifacts because this did used to be a surface. So the question becomes, and the idea is this is tertiary period material. So that puts it at anywhere between 10 to 30 million to 50 million years old, depending on where it was. So not only, so again, we got multiple strikes against it. Like this is in the Americas, which it can't be that old. They're anatomically modern bones and very advanced tools. They don't like that for even in Europe. If you found something that old, it would be, that would be bad. And then the fact that it's so ancient due to the age that they think that strata is, that it puts it outside of the scope of human evolution entirely, or it basically puts modern humans back all the way back before what they think of as, Homo erectus, like way before them.
Right. And it's possible that you could have had an anatomically modern human at the same time as Homo erectus.
Yeah, but the standard model does not accept that. But
right.
yes,
yeah.
I completely agree. Yeah. And the question is like, so it's interesting to see the difference in what we know about the science now and what not the science, but what the accepted concepts are now that, for example, Neanderthals were not so much a precursor to Homo sapiens sapiens, but we're actually like a brother species. We lived alongside them as opposed to them being our ancestors. In other words, that Neanderthals lived with Homo sapiens sapiens, not that Homo sapiens sapiens arose from Neanderthals, right?
Right. Yeah.
There's a big difference. And now we have like the Denisovans that were also, no one knows what they look like. We haven't found any remains of them yet, but they do exist in our genetics, and they also seem to be another brother species to Homo sapiens sapiens and the Neanderthals. And the human species, the Homo sape have been pushed back to 200 to 300,000 years old.
Yeah.
Whereas when they were writing this book in the late 80s, 100,000 years old is what they thought. And at the advent of modern humans in Europe was 30,000 years ago. Well, we've got caves with paintings in them now that are 40,000 years old in Europe. So that's been pushed back.
Yep.
So lots of these, like, Graham Hancock is always saying, things keep getting older.
Yeah, I was just going to say that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what becomes apparent as you go through the book is that it's very similar to I'm not sure how familiar you are with the Clovis first thing. I mean, Graham talks about this a lot, right? They dig down, they find Clovis, they stop digging in the Americas because you've now found the first people.
Yeah.
Right.
No point digging deeper because there was nobody there.
Don't dig any deeper. So now that's out. So now people are digging deeper. And of course they're finding artifacts because Clovis was not first.
Yeah.
And that's now accepted. He was controversial for a long time.
Well, even the Clovis stuff was controversial for a long time.
Yeah, if you go back far enough, the advent of humans into the Americas was thought to be only 5,000 years ago.
Right.
Clovis was then 12, 10 to 12, and then they had to push it back to 15, and then they pushed it back a little bit more to 17, and now it's like, all right, there were people here before Clovis at 22 and 30.
Yeah, so what you see happening through as like time develops from like the late 1800s through the early 1900s, and then after the pretty much the new accepted model of human development and evolution is the reverse of the Clovis first thing. Before that, they were digging in all these places and accepting and debating certain finds of Homo sapiens sapien bones, anatomically modern human bones. And then once they accepted this other story, those finds were then thrown out, and nobody's digging or looking for human bones in any of these places. And that's not even happening anymore.
Yeah.
Right. You're not going to have an archaeologist come and dig through something that's 300 million years old.
Yeah. Because they're not going to find anything.
No.
That'd only be a paleontologist, and if he found a human bone, he would probably hide it or something.
Or just it must have cracked. The surface cracked, and it came out, and then they just don't even put it in the literature. So
right. Yeah.
Yeah, there's one guy when we were going through the artifacts section, basically, because they separate the book into sections. Like first they go through, all right, like their findings, we're looking at cut bones.
Yeah.
And this is still, I mean, it's hotly debated even today, like what constitute butchering marks on a bone as opposed to geological scrapes and scratches.
Right.
Graham
talks a lot about that too in his latest book.
Who does? Sorry,
Graham.
Oh, Graham does. Yeah. And it's, it's like we're nerding out on this on our show, and I'm like, how interesting is this to people? Because we're just like, oh man, look at these scratches on this bone. It's like, is this really interesting to people? Yeah, it is, because it's telling us about our origins, possibly.
Yeah.
And so, and then the next section after that, after the bones section, animal bones section, and butchering section it moves to stone tools, and they separate it into what they call eoliths, paleoliths, and neoliths, which are just simple terms that mean an eolith is like a very rudimentary tool where you basically find a flint chip or maybe a piece of granite that's shaped already correctly for what you want to do, which is like bang on something and cut it maybe.
Right.
Maybe you make a few modifications, but basically it's like you pick it up and you're like, this rock is already the right shape for me to do what I want to do with it.
So the rock shows work.
Yeah.
And the work is not working on the rock, but the work that you're doing with it.
Yeah.
So if you were cutting a bone with it, it's going to have an abrade, the edge is going to be abraded.
Yeah.
Basically.
Like you can look at it with just a magnifying glass and see that somebody has used this as a tool. Because just one edge, the sharp side has microscopic, not microscopic, but damage that requires close scrutiny, but not a microscope to see. And then the next set is paleoliths, where they have picked up chips and they've actually started to modified them. They're napping them into what we would think of as spear points or scrapers. And then the neoliths are the really advanced points that everybody thinks of when they think of an arrowhead. The really beautiful pieces.
Right.
It's a bifacial. They've worked every part of the surface of the tool.
Yeah, made it real thin and just beautiful. And so, when they're finding, so you've got these finds where they're finding something like paleoliths, say unifacials, where it's just been the tool has only been worked on one side to make it a little sharper. And there are all these, it goes back and forth with these scientists who are saying, well, it's because it's in that ancient strata, that must have been the result of geological chipping.
Right.
You know, and then of course the authors take pains to point out if this had been found in acceptable timescales in terms of the strata, no one would question that it's a human tool.
Right.
But because it's found too deep or in a place where it can't be there, or, you know, it's underneath this layer of lava, which we know is too ancient for people who have been in this particular spot, or it isn't necessarily that there weren't people around yet, but it's too advanced for what we think people were doing at that time, it must be geological chipping, even though it looks like a human artifact.
Yeah, and a great example of that is a fossilized shoe, a piece of like a fossilized shoe sole.
Yeah.
Really?
I mean, it's a solid piece of rock, but it looks like the heel of a shoe sole. And they're like,
Yeah, not a footprint, but the sole
of an actual shoe, and it's got the stitching going around the edge of it.
And it was discovered by a geologist, so it's not like a...
Yes.
Yeah.
And they're like, man, this is just a really good natural representation of what looks like a shoe, but it's totally natural, you know. And so then they get a lens out and they look at the stitching closer, and the rock, the lithified stitch thread itself, you can see the twists in the thread where the thread was actually manufactured. Like it's got the same twisting all the way around.
Oh wow.
And it's like, yeah, this is a really good natural representation of what a shoe looks like, down to the twisting of the thread.
Yeah. Yep. They were saying it was the most astounding natural artifact that looks like a manufactured artifact ever found.
And of course, go ahead.
I just this kind of stuff. You're like, okay, I don't know. This is. For me, I already am kind of just like open to the possibility that we've got all these, the timeline wrong and all this kind of stuff. But just some of the stuff, like that shoe being found somewhere way down deep in something, and it's completely turned to stone.
Yeah,
it's just mind-boggling to me. I'm just like, how maybe we don't understand the processes, all of the possible processes of fossilization or lithification. I don't know. It's
right.
Just,
yeah, and that's the other thing. I mean, we make a lot of assumptions about this stuff. About how coal is formed or how oil is formed. And I know there's some debate as to how oil is actually formed.
Yep, that's right. Can it form abiotically? Is a question. Yeah. Because most geologists will tell you absolutely not, right? I mean, but there is a debate, but it's the people who think there's a possibility for abiotic production of hydrocarbons. They're on what would be considered the fringes.
Right.
Coal freaks me out because
at least in the Western world.
I think of like, you take the Amazon rainforest and you set the entire thing on fire, and then you lay down an entire chunk of crust on top of it, and then it's being compressed while it's on fire, and that's what turns it into coal.
Yeah.
Just like, how does that even happen?
Yeah.
To begin with, because they're just gigantic masses of organic materials that are basically that were burning when they were buried.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's
And so it just
from a cataclysmic viewpoint, that makes more sense.
Yeah. Yep. But you'll see geological arguments that say, well, because I mean, the way people make charcoal today, if you want to make it, that's what you do. You get a bunch of wood, and you split it up into specifically sized pieces. You set them on fire very carefully so that they're kind of all burning evenly, and then you cover them in mud and you wait.
I didn't realize that. That's interesting.
Yeah. You wait a while, and then eventually you remove all the mud, and it's, I mean, very wet. Like think clay, like very wet clay. You completely make a dome over the fire with clay, and you wait, and then you take the clay apart, and the wood has sort of slowly oven cooked inside this thing, and when you take it apart, it breaks into these perfect little cubic pieces that are charcoal that are now very dry and are ready to burn with much more heat than you could get from normal wood, because you've gotten rid of all the moisture, and but there's still burnable material in there.
Huh.
So one way to make charcoal is to take, or one way to make big layers of coal is to take a lot of biomass, set it all on fire, and then bury it in mud. But you'll see geological arguments that say, well, you can replicate that process over millions and millions and millions of years by just slowly burying biomass under increasing amounts of sediment, and the pressure is what.
Yes.
Right. But it is possible. It's
like a mummification of a lot of biomass.
The pressure generates the heat, and then you dry it. But it's possible that large cataclysmic events, if they've happened multiple times, can generate coal very quickly and also bury it under enormous amounts of material, in a geological instant, in a matter of months or less.
And then you have like the going into the Fortiana range, how many times Charles Fort pointed out frogs being found in coal veins.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And in the book, there's quite a few, interesting cases of golden chains, like an iron cup, I think, was found, like the block thing that I mentioned, a section of stone tile that was engraved with a diamond pattern that had a bunch of faces, all the same faces in there, like a face of an old man, all looking in the same direction. All found in coal.
Yeah.
And then lots of quarries, where they're quarrying. Like one of the most interesting ones to me when we were in the artifacts section was a story, and this was published in a respectable, I can't remember what it was, as a Journal of Natural Science or something like that, but it was a 1800s, so no one will accept this today. But quarrymen were working in a particular quarry, and they were, I think it might have been France, I don't remember. They were rebuilding some building, the Palace of Justice, I think is what they said it was. I don't know where that is, but they were quarrying material out of a limestone quarry, and the quarry was basically set up where there would be a large, thick layer of limestone, and they would get through all of that, and then below that there would be a layer of sand or pebbles, or aggregate, and then below that would be more limestone, and they would dig through several feet of that, sometimes up to 10 feet of it, and they had gone down 10 of those levels of the limestone and sand. And then the bottom of that 11th layer of limestone, the very bottom of it, all the limestone had shells and marine incrustations stuck to it.
Mm-hmm.
And then below that was more sand. And in the sand, before they got to the next layer of limestone down, but in the sand, they found quarry tools and remnants of pieces of columns that had been being quarried by whoever a long time ago, and then it was presumably buried under multiple layers of limestone. One of the one just above it, which had marine incrustations on it.
Right. Wow.
Yeah, and they said that the quarry tools, many of which, they were like typical quarry tools, wooden, hammers and other things with handles and working parts of wood, and quarry boards, all of which had been turned into agate, basically petrified and turned into like a jewel. Yeah. And it was like, okay, so what can explain that? Either you say that someone was using human style tools so far back that 11 layers of limestone were able to build up on top of it after they were doing this work.
Yeah.
Or this is a cataclysm of some kind, or multiple ones, and it isn't that far back. I just don't know. I mean, it could be it could be both. I have no idea. But the whole book is fascinating, and it just makes you think. Like, what's wrong here? What's wrong with our story?
Yeah, a lot, I think.
Yeah,
and and that bias toward we already know the answers is part of the problem.
You tell me how the electric universe makes 11 limestone layers, man.
Have you heard of the electric universe?
Have you ever heard of this theory?
But that's kind of the thing. Even a cataclysm, what's going to form 11 limestone layers?
I know that's and the standard. If I remember correctly, because we live on limestone bedrock, and there are solid sections, and then it gets like gravelly and very brittle, and sometimes sandy and clay, and then there's another solid section.
Yeah.
And I think that the explanation is that this is different levels of the sea, right? The shallow seas would rise, and when the waters were deeper, the limestone would be more tightly packed, and it would actually create like the solid limestone. And then the seas would recede, and then you have the more hackly sort of grainy stuff that's not very well cemented together, and then they would get deep again, and it's like back and forth and back and forth. So you have these layers built up over eons, you know.
Yeah, and possibly like, you know, the inclusion of, say, volcanic ash,
Right.
Yeah.
into particular parts of the deposition makes it cement together much better into stone versus others, and so
it's hard to imagine how this process could be done quickly for 11 layers of thick limestone. I just don't. I mean, yeah. But then again, excuse me. It's kind of like the missing 411 stuff. You know, where are these artifacts? Well, they're gone. You know, we can't inspect them, so you have to take them for their word.
The site's gone, the artifacts are gone, and all we have are the reports.
Well, and I mean that's kind of what happens when you look at the discovery of giants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, certainly some of them were probably newspapers, you know, just trying to bring in viewers, but there's plenty of stuff that's even listed in the Smithsonian that you can't look at.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's right.
And
so some of them, you know, some of the accounts in the book, you know, I don't know what to do with it. I'm just like, well, and then other ones where they're very well documented and they're being heavily debated amongst well-respected scientists of the time. And there's a lot of evidence put forth, and the data, you know, those I'm like, wow, you know, this is very convincing.
Yeah,
and it does seem like it was just thrown out because it didn't fit.
right.
Like in some cases it's even so much as first the discovery is made, and it's made by a competent scientist who's well respected by his peers in that day, and then he brings out a couple of people to come look. And then they bring the evidence to, like, for example, a conference or, you know, a meeting of like the you know, of a bunch of scientists or anthropologists or whatever looking at these kinds of things, and they show the evidence that they've found to these guys, and then they're intrigued, but they're not quite buying it, but they're intrigued, and then they form like a group of them, and they go back out to the site and they do more digging in a different spot, and they find more artifacts. You know, and so it's like it's very well documented, and nevertheless, it leaves the scientific literature over time because it doesn't fit the model that's being built.
Right. And I mean that's I think a human thing. You know, it's not just scientists that do that. Everyone kind of does that.
Oh, of course,
you
right?
know?
Yeah, we can't say that it's just like, can't lay the blame on this just as scientists. You're right. It's absolutely human nature. But I think that science is kind of held up as something that is supposed to be a system that keeps people from doing that.
Right. Yes, absolutely. And it should be.
It's like a whole follow the data thing.
Yeah.
And science is a system that allows us to change our ideas if we find evidence that says our ideas are wrong. And yet we have example after example where that's not happening.
You have Darrell Bem's work in Cornell, where he's the one that showed that people responded to random images before the computer even picked the images.
Oh yeah,
and it was peer reviewed, it was replicated, and the response was kind of like, well, according to the standards we've set for this stuff over all these years that seem to work, he's showing this precognition. We know that doesn't exist, so maybe we need to re-examine our methodology.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's they can't accept it based on theoretical preconsiderations, and so they throw out evidence which in any other situation would be considered solid.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's
so. Yeah, I think.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just gonna. I think the good news is that it seems like there's a growing number of people that are like scientists in the fields of archaeology or paleontology or geology that are taking a look at these things again. Not necessarily specifically the cases in this book, but there are a lot of questions, like the fact that the Clovis first thing has finally been toppled is now changing a lot of the way people look at stuff, and there are accredited geologists looking deeply into a lot of the stuff that Randall is studying and asking these questions, the same questions that Randall's been asking for 30 years. So there is progress in that aspect. So I think that's good. And you're right. You make a really good point that a lot of this is just human nature. It pointing the finger at scientists is not the right thing to do. It's just science is supposed to be a process that is set up to keep the human nature out of it.
Right.
But there's no way to make that perfect.
Nope.
So yeah, it's a difficult thing.
And then you look at like all the issues Robert Schoch had when, he dated the Sphinx geologically, and not a single geologist disagreed with him, but the Egyptologists didn't change their data.
That's right. Yeah.
It's like,
and even geologists knew once they realized what they were looking at, they're like, ooh.
Yeah.
Don't know if I want to put my name on that.
Yeah.
But that none of them actually, none of them dissented against Robert. I mean, they didn't say he was wrong.
Right.
They didn't.
The geological work seemed to be sound. More could be done, but it isn't. It's very dangerous.
So, it's dangerous because it rewrites, archaeology.
Right. Well, what I mean is it's dangerous for a geologist personally to engage in that work because it would ruin his career, possibly.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, Robert was actually brave enough to put his name on the line.
Only after he had tenure.
Sure.
Which was good. Which was a smart move. Yeah.
You cannot blame him for that.
No, absolutely not. Yeah.
Because didn't they try to revoke? No, it wasn't him that they tried to revoke.
John Mack.
John Max, yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we talked about that in our last episode. Yeah, but we got some questions for people like, how would you fix this problem? If you were king of the world and you can't change human nature, is there a way where we can fix this issue? I don't think there is.
Yeah.
Well, part of the problem is the scientific process is so driven by grants. Like it's not, the money isn't just there.
Yeah, exactly.
So you have to kind of play ball in order to get the money to do the things that you really want to do. And sometimes you have to kind of, you can maybe put that stuff out there, but you can't draw too much attention to it. And then, slowly over time, people are like, hey, why did nobody talk about this?
Yeah, and this is why it's a good thing that people of other backgrounds get involved.
Yeah.
Right? Because we all have skin in the game. Right? And so people like Graham Handcock, he gets involved in these ideas. He writes about it. He's a writer. But then you have the problem of the accusation of pseudoscience, right? He was never claiming to do science.
Right.
He was claiming to be a journalist.
Yeah, and asking questions.
That's not doing science. That's just, just being a curious person and a good writer. And but they use that, and that I don't know, that's just a sort of a pet peeve, I guess, because I think that it's good that people like Michael Cremo or Graham Handcock get involved in these situations and write about them, categorize them, document them in a way that is presentable to the public, so that we can all ask the questions, right?
Yeah.
And it hopefully generates a new
interest and
a new set of scientists.
Exactly.
Like, for example, like you brought up last night, Mark Young, who was like, I started looking at Graham Handcock and then I got interested in Randall stuff, and now he's in school for archaeology and geology. And he's there because of those interests, And he's following the dream. He's like, I love these ideas. I'm interested in these ideas, and I'm going to go to school and get credentialed so I can look at these ideas from a professional standpoint.
Right, and hopefully not get blackballed out of the, profession.
Right, yeah.
And the other problem, I think, too, is that you have, you have people who are who only study one thing. And this is across the board.
Yes.
I mean, everyone's a specialist, but very few people are multidisciplinary.
That's right. Compartmentalization of knowledge.
Yeah, and whereas that's great that some people are experts, that's very useful. It's also useful to have a wider view of it. I remember in one of the the Lost City series from David Hatcher Childress, he's talking about being in South America and how, if he didn't know where he was, he would maybe think he was in China looking at some of these artifacts. And he said something to the woman who went, well, I don't study that stuff. I wouldn't even look at that stuff. That's not my field. And, he's like, but maybe it should be because there's a similarity here that you can't ignore.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, we need great specialists and great generalists.
Yeah.
Both looking at it. So you got the bigger picture and the macro and the micro.
Yeah.
So we're out of time.
Oh.
Time flies in the cube.
That's right.
So we're going to do a Patreon segment, but where can people find your wonderful podcast?
Well,
on the moon.
Are we arranging to send a piece of it to the moon? brothersoftheserpent.com is where you can find all the podcast related stuff. And of course, the podcast as an RSS feed is available anywhere podcasts can be found, like Apple Podcasts and on Spotify and everything like that. Brothers of the Serpent.
So that's your wonderful podcast. Where can people find the podcasts you don't want them hearing? The really bad ones.
The terrible podcast.
Yeah.
Well, we don't have a terrible podcast, but we do have another one we do with Randall Carlson.
Oh, that's true. That's also a wonderful podcast, though.
Yeah, so if anybody is interested in Randall's work and hearing Kyle and I be very dumb while listening to Randall, it's hard to sound smart when you're dealing with that guy. You can look up Cosmographia. That's Cosmographia with a K. And you can find everything about that at randallcarlson.com.
But really, the terrible podcast is you can look up Brothers of the Serpent Archive, which is all the oldest episodes in the RSS feed. And that's the terrible podcast.
Okay, so on our website, we do have the archive section, and I built basically a static feed that has all the old shows in it. So that's where the terrible version of the podcast is. The first 50 episodes where we swore every other word, and you know how it is. So.
All right, awesome. Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us, man.
And I want to take a moment here to thank all of my Patreons. Seriously, you people are the lifeblood of this show. And I want to give a special shout out to those pledging $10 or more. Allison Cook, Super Inframan, Eric Hervin, Tim, The 100th Monkey Project, Ad Noctum, Patricia Giaquinta, Alex Whitcomb, Alfred Tuttle, American Rambler, Andy McNamara, Barbara Fisher, Beverly Williamson, Big Boy Limina, Charles Davis, Chris Ernst, Craig Parmenter, David Moore, Denise Sarek, Dominic O'Malley, Edu Camahort, MTK, Eric Citron, J. Otto Bullitt, John Bracken, Eric Todd, James Lattimore, Puck Brother, Joanna Rojas, Jose A., Carla Mahoney, Kevin, Kristen L., Kevin Schreck, Linz Jackson K., Luke Osborne, Jim and Sophie, Mark Bowley, Mark Brady, Matthew Sproul, Maddie, Nagatha Christie, Patricia W., Ray Benedetto, Riker and Stark, Roger Gonzalez, Sam Sheeron, Sedgder, Stone Wilderness, Tactical Therapist, Taylor, 36 Dingo, Vincent Treewell, Walker, Will Powell, William Lovelace, and Ren Collier. Thank you all so very much. So, of course, there is a Patreon segment to go along with this. It's also a pretty long show, so it's almost like getting another show with these guys. And that will be up later in the week for Patreons. And a big thank you to all of you who are already Patreons. If you'd like to help support the show and get a bunch of extra content, you can go to wheretheroadgo.com and click on the Patreon link. All right, that's all I have for you for right now, so we will see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange.